Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report on the Real News Network. Our goal on this show is simple. Myself, along with my co-host Janis, created this segment with one goal in mind: holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. To do so, we look beyond the headlines and explore the underlying imperative of the country's addiction to law enforcement, an issue that is relevant to our topic today. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us, and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us either in the comments or message us at the Police Accountability Report on Facebook or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. Now, the reason why it's so important I mention how to reach us is because our viewers just sent us 2 important videos of possible police brutality and misconduct, which we will investigate and discuss today. Now we're going to take a look at 2 cases in small towns where police used deadly force in questionable situations, decisions that led to tragic consequences and raise uncomfortable questions about why small town policing has in some cases turned just as aggressive as their urban counterparts. And nowhere is that more true than in the small Eastern Shore town of Greensboro, Maryland. Its population is 2,000, and crime, according to the data we looked at, almost non-existent. Stephen, there isn't much crime in Greensboro, but they still have a police department. Why do they?
This is a great question. We were just looking at the crime data before the show started, and as far as I can see in terms of the information publicly available, there were 33 crimes in Greensboro in the past year, 33, 34, like 1 burglary, 9 robberies and 22 thefts, you know, something that would really could be handled by an outside agency. Really no crime, basically, but yet they have a police department with 3 to 4 officers. And it raises a great question: why does this town have a police department to begin with? Because it's extremely expensive, and as we're going to talk about, it created some serious problems.
But for some reason, several years ago, residents there told us the town hired more aggressive cops. One of them was charged with breaking the jaw of an African-American man during an arrest. But despite concerns from the community, the town hired him. And it was Webster's decision to chase 19-year-old Anton Black that led to this encounter caught on body camera. Here you can see Anton is taken to the ground, and one of the officers lays his body across him. It is this point that an outside expert we consulted said Anton died from positional asphyxiation. But despite the evidence, prosecutors declined to investigate Officer Webster, and the Maryland State Medical Examiner ruled his death an accident. Stephen, the medical examiner has a penchant for ruling accidental in cases of police-involved brutality and death.
We've looked at several cases, including Tyrone West, Antoine Boyd in Maryland, where police laid on top of him or put downward pressure, where outside experts or outside pathologists said it was positional asphyxiation, but our state medical examiner had ruled an accident. And this has raised a lot of questions and a lot of tensions in the community, because the belief is that the medical examiner is working with police to cover up these cases. And that, of course, was true in Anton's case. As you can see in the body cam footage, there's an officer laying across him. We didn't point this out, but Anton was like 5'9", 160 pounds. And you have a 200-pound cop laying right across his body.
Who initially had his arm around his neck in a chokehold type position. And positional asphyxiation comes when you're laying prone on the ground, and then you have a heavy weight put on top of you. It's something that also happens when someone is in a riot, and it's called trauma crush. You're laying down on the ground, and then people put their weight on top of you, and it leads to positional asphyxiation.
Yeah, and that's why the medical examiner we consulted, decided that it was positional asphyxiation, but the medical examiner, state medical examiner, who really makes this determination, said it was an accident related to a underlying heart condition, which seemed really kind of random. And as our medical pathologist said, was something that really wouldn't factor into his death and would be something he could live with his whole life, and wasn't really that sort of physical anomaly that would cause any problems. So this has been a big problem in this state because young men, African-American men, have died in police custody, and the medical examiner keeps ruling them accidents.
Now, didn't we hear that there were actually police officers in the room while the autopsy was being performed? So couldn't that have an undue influence on the decision or the ruling that the medical examiner makes?
According to A. Dwight Pettit, who is a board member of the Real News, but also a civil rights attorney, one of the biggest problems he encounters when he is litigating these cases in federal court is that police officers are present during the autopsy and also are providing most of the information that the medical examiner is receiving. So there is a sense that there is not an independent outside authority that is looking at this, but rather an agency that is completely compromised by police. That's a big concern.
But yesterday we saw the consequences of both unnecessary policing and lax oversight, a family's inconsolable pain. The Real News attended a memoriam for Anton 1 year after he died at the hands of police. There, his family expressed frustration with authorities' refusal to charge the officers involved.
We want justice. We're going to get it one way or another. If we're going to go as far as we can, as long as we can, and we don't care if it takes years to see any type of settlement. Dollars don't mean anything to us. You cannot put a price on his life. You cannot put a price on my mother and my father's son, my brother, my sisters. None of us care. That doesn't matter.
Police say a white woman called police and said Anton had kidnapped a young boy. However, the boy turned out to be his cousin. And as the surveillance video we obtained reveals, Anton and his cousin are casually walking together prior to being stopped. Footage that hardly looks like a kidnapping, which is why Anton's father asked a question that too often goes unanswered in the wake of police-related deaths. What justified the decision by police to chase, taser, and arrest this young man?
What I don't understand is why is he gone? What did he do? He was walking down the street with his friend, a young man that he mentored. He used to go to the track and teach kids how to run with his coach, someone he looked up to, his track coach. What did he do that was so bad? He wanted to be a police officer because he used to look up to the chief. He used to stay at his house. What was so bad about it? All he was doing was walking down that road a block from his house. When somebody said he tried to kidnap somebody. Okay, where are the handcuffs? None. Where's the rope? None. Where's the duct tape? None. That's all a lie.
But during the protests, we also learned of some developments behind the scenes that stunned us. The same prosecutors who refused to investigate the officers involved in Anton's death had launched a probe into another Caroline County cop. Stephen, can you explain what you heard?
Well, yeah, according to people that we spoke to who have been working with the family to investigate this, the Caroline County attorney has appointed a special prosecutor to look into an arrest of a white resident by the former police chief of Greensboro that did not result in injury, but was just considered to be a little overly aggressive. And there was feeling in the family and the people who support Anton that this is completely ridiculous and disproportionate, because why would they investigate the arrest that didn't lead to any injury and appoint a special prosecutor, but in the case of Anton, declined to even impanel a grand jury. In other cases like Michael Brown in St. Louis, they went to a grand jury in Eric Gardner. Of course, the grand jury did not return an indictment, but at least they went through the process. Well, here in Caroline County, Joe Riley, the state's attorney, refused to bring the case to a grand jury. So there's really no sense that anything was done at all.
And now we turn to a story that came from you, our viewers. A viewer, Noli D, emailed us about the developing story of a police killing in Aberdeen, Washington. As you can see here in the video, police shot and killed this man, Christopher Fitzpatrick, after they say he brandished a gun. However, the video from a nearby surveillance camera released after the police said Fitzpatrick was armed raises questions about that version of events. Stephen, we both looked at the video, and even though it's sometimes hard to see, how do you interpret what you saw?
Well, I mean, it's not the best video, but it's hard to see a gun. I mean, we looked at it multiple times, and we can show it now while we're talking. And I think there's great questions about whether or not this man was armed. I mean, it's not obvious, let's put it that way.
Right.
Whether or not it's conclusive is also difficult to say, but I think there's enough questions to continue to examine this case because it's not clear that he is armed at the time.
And one of the things that I think brings up some of these concerning questions is the fact that there was a witness named John Miller who gave a statement to KIRO 7, which is their local news station. And that person, John Miller, said that he did not see a gun in that man's hand.
All the more reason to take a closer look at this story. story and to thank our viewers for sending it to us because we need
Yes.
to keep on this.
Now, the video sent to us by a viewer also includes a statement from the Aberdeen police chief regarding the shooting, where he is adamant the deceased man was unarmed.
Warnings had been given to put the gun down. Unfortunately, the suspect did not heed those warnings. My officer did fire a number of rounds. I don't know how many at this point.
But there is an untold backstory here. There were problems with the Aberdeen police prior to the shooting, which may shed some light on why it occurred in the first place. And to help us understand what was happening in the town and how it relates to our discussion about over-policing in small-town America, we are joined by a resident of Aberdeen, Mike, a veteran who runs the Blind Justice YouTube channel to hold government and police accountable. Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you've had some issues with the police department. Can you tell us a little bit about them and what you experienced?
So about last summer, we started protesting some unconstitutional ordinances the city was passing targeting the homeless. They're trying to say it's illegal for people to sit on the public sidewalk. And so we did a protest downtown for about 70 days. Police came out a few times trying to remove us from public sidewalks and to get me arrested on the 4th of July. Even I was in a
Wow.
park and it had a petition to overturn the ordinance, which is an interesting privilege that they have there in that city. They can just overturn it with enough signatures from the residents. And the mayor himself and the city attorney called for the police to have me arrested in the park on the 4th of July. So that there was that.
Wait, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because I know you're about to tell me the icing on the cake, but I think I already see the icing on the cake. You are a veteran who was celebrating the 4th of July, and you were told you don't have a right to do so in a public park? I can't even believe what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, they went to their codes and their ordinances. There's over 6,000, by the way, locally in Aberdeen. 6,000 ordinances.
Wow.
So good luck trying to follow all of them. But they found a little section where they said they can limit freedom of speech at events. And so they took that clause that they have there, which is worded pretty interestingly, but they took it and expanded it to First Amendment. They erected these First Amendment zones at all these different events in the summer last year in response to our protesting of their unconstitutional ordinance for targeting the homeless. And so they had these little cones of silence set up at all these events downtown in this park that I was in on the 4th of July, and they wanted me to move to their little First Amendment zone. So nobody had their freedom of speech or freedom of religion or freedom of assembly. They couldn't do any of those according to the city unless they were inside a little coned off area, and I refused. So the police wanted to confiscate my sign that was encouraging people to exercise their First Amendment rights to protest and sign a petition. And they threatened me with arrest. There's a video on our channel with that, the whole incident.
To me, this is absolutely incredible. You're a veteran and you're standing up for the rights of a really vulnerable population of people, the homeless. And you were threatened with both arrest and prosecution. Is that right?
Yeah, there was a few different instances. One where the chief of police physically assaulted me in a city council meeting because the mayor didn't like what I had to say. I was calling out the malfeasance and the corruption, and so he was trying to order me to stop talking. It was during a public comment period, mind you. I had the podium, and they just didn't like what I was saying, so he ordered his police chief to remove me, and he came in and put hands on me. Him and his assistant chief tried to use force to get me out, and then they when I took that to the sheriff's department, they wanted to prosecute me for public disturbance or some nonsense.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me something about the population of Aberdeen. It seems like this is a small town that has a really aggressive police force. Tell me, how big is Aberdeen?
So the population is about 17,000 people. 1,000 people don't have permanent homes, and it's got one of the highest homeless children population in the state of Washington.
Oh, wow.
And so there is some high use of methamphetamines but that doesn't necessarily mean it's tied to the homeless population.
Right.
They try to make that tie all the time. They try to use it as an excuse to get people off the street, to initiate contact. That, if they see somebody drinking out of a can, they try to use anything they can to give them a reason of what they think is a justifiable legal reason to initiate contact, to kick somebody off the street, somebody that's already down.
So it sounds like they're doing their own version of like what we had in Baltimore of zero tolerance policing, where whatever they can use to arrest somebody or engage them, they're just using.
Yeah, absolutely. So what started me into this scene with activism was I just heard word that they were discussing making these ordinances saying it's illegal for people to ask for money, to panhandle in some places in the city, and then for people to sit down on the sidewalk. And when I asked the public safety committee that it came out of, like, what's the public safety concern of somebody sitting down on the sidewalk? They didn't have an answer. The chair finally said, well, it becomes a concern when we have to enforce the ordinance. I'm like, well, then you're creating the hazard. You're sending people with guns to kick somebody off the sidewalk and telling them to get up and move. And if they are unstable, if they are drunk, if they are trying to leave something off, then you're kicking somebody off the sidewalk and into the street. Then you're causing safety concern. Yeah, I agree.
So tell me a little bit more about the relationship between the police department and the community. It seems like they are targeting this homeless population, which is surprisingly full of young children. How does the police department interact with the rest of the community?
The community, it's interesting. It's a small town community. It's a kind of a rural community, but it also has a lot of traffic going through to the beach. So it's about 30 minutes from the West Coast, and it's the main thoroughfare from Olympia and through Seattle. If you want to get to a lot of the beaches in Washington, and you go through Aberdeen. So not many people like to stop in Aberdeen, and the local community isn't very welcoming. We only lived there for a couple of years, and a very close-knit kind of good old boy system, which typically means that they're close and support their law enforcement, and the law enforcement kind of does the same, unless you're on the business end of the law enforcement,
right?
Which a lot of people are. A lot of people don't trust and don't like the law enforcement because they use abuse, and they use any tactics they can to try to make revenue for the city.
So I know that you actually asked Sheriff Steve Shimati about the shooting. Can you tell me about the response you got, and can you tell me what you know about the shooting of Mr. Fitzpatrick?
Well, the video that we have on our channel is me asking the new Aberdeen Police Chief, Steve Shumate. This is months ago. This is prior to this shooting. This shooting happened this past Monday.
Right.
But because of the aggressive nature and the abuse that I was already aware of from the Aberdeen Police, and this was a new chief coming in, mind you, he came in from the Sheriff's Department. So who's investigating the shooting of Mr. Fitzpatrick? The Sheriff's Department, where Steve just came from. Right. Wow. So when I asked him this question, he was new to Aberdeen months ago, and he was coming in. He held town halls to try to set people at ease about police. They had major turnovers in the Aberdeen Police in the last 2 years. A lot of their senior officers either left or retired. So when I asked him about holding his officers accountable, their criminal behavior, them violating laws, violating people's rights, assaulting people, and raiding people's homes without warrants, I asked if he would hold them accountable when he knew his officers were breaking the law, or if he was going to plan on holding them accountable to policies like happens all over the country when officers kill people. He said that he'd hold his officers accountable to policies. And so I asked him a second time, and he still didn't say he'd hold them accountable to the law. He'd hold them accountable to department policy.
That's a very fine distinction to make, to hold the officers not accountable to the law, but to the internal policies of the police department. That is a very fine and tricky distinction that's being made there. So tell me, I know you mentioned to me that you know of a pastor who knows the man who was shot. Do you know how the community is responding to this killing?
Yeah, so we keep an ear to the ground as far as at least on the social media scene with the community, and that's what's interesting is you get a lot of polarization. A lot of people that they're actually on the ground, that you meet in person, that on the street are caring and loving, and find it tragic when there's this violent loss of life. One of the things that started protesting last year was a vigil for, I think there's about over 20 homeless people that died in the year prior to that. And they had a vigil for Mr. Fitzpatrick yesterday. So the community is strong as far as supporting each other. Mm-hmm. They just, there's a polarization going on. There literally is a hill in Aberdeen. There's a ridge, and then there's a river, right? And the wealthy live on the hill and look down on the people that live down by the river. And that has been the case for a long time, as far as I know. And it's seen in the policies that get passed to the city. It's seen in the policies that the police work under. It's seen in social media, and it's seen day to day when people are yelling at each other, usually from different classes. But when it comes to actual people on the street, I've only witnessed nothing but love and care for one another.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Stephen, I've got to ask you, what sort of questions does this story raise for you? Because we seem to get from Blind Justice here that there is a pattern of police overstepping their bounds and even trampling on people's constitutional rights.
Well, as many cases we've examined, including our own Baltimore Police Department, it sounds like they're trying to solve a complex social economic problem with aggressive policing. And we've seen how that's played out in cities like Baltimore, where you have zero tolerance, people get arrested, and ultimately people die. And because you can't use policing to solve homelessness or drug addiction, and yet this country continues to double down on that idea. That's why we talked about at the beginning of the show, America's addiction to policing. You know, if you have a homeless population, if you have people suffering from drug abuse, they need services, just like this man who we see in the video who seems to be agitated and going through some sort of mental crisis. And they shoot him. And how many times as reporters have we encountered that, where you have a complex social problem or a person in distress, or even in the case of Anton Black, who, you know, police had said, we think he's having a psychological crisis. And he ends up dead. And this is the problem, and this is why we have to keep addressing this, because policing has been poorly situated at the center of what really is a social problem, but that has been exacerbated by economic or income inequality and the people who have the power and the economic power. Instead of addressing the problem through social, through some sort of social agency or some sort of other political solution, use policing. And policing always is and really rooted in violence. And so that's the problem. They have a complex social problem where people are suffering, and they address it with police, law enforcement, and violence.
Mike, I just wanted to ask you one last question in relation to things changing in this police department, things getting better for the community. My first question is, do you think that the police department is actually going to reveal what really happened to Mr. Fitzpatrick that day?
No. in a word, no. But to kind of echo what your co-host said about policing being rooted in violence, that was the question I asked Steve Shumate about holding his officers accountable was one of the three questions I asked that day. Another one was asking him personally if he considered himself a peace officer or a law enforcement officer. And I ask law enforcement officers this all the time, because I don't think you can truly hold both those positions like in your head. It's cognitive dissonance. They think they can. They think they're keeping the peace by causing violence. And that's the answer I continually get. That's what he told me. And so it's really hard to get through when they think that they have to make peace through war, basically. They have to make everyone submit to in the ruling class. And then that's peace.
Well, I think that's a good place to stop. I want to thank my co-host, Stephen Janis, for joining me, and I want to thank Mike of Blind Justice for his help in holding government and policing accountable. And remember, if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us, and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us either in the comments or message us at the Police Accountability Report on Facebook or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And of course, please like and subscribe. I'll be there in the comments section. I'm your host, Taya Graham, and I want to thank you for joining me on the Police Accountability Report.